Dr. Macks Marvels, Arc 1, Introducing Dr. Mack. Chapter 1, The Workshop Awakens, a Dr. Mack and His World. The first rays of dawn slanted through the towering windows of Dr. Mack's workshop, illuminating a symphony of chaos. Gears and cogs clattered in controlled pandemonium, steam hissed from a dozen unseen pipes, and the faint scent of burnt metal and lavender oil swirled through the air. Amid the disarray, a mechanical owl perched on a rusted pipe, blinking its brass eyelids as it surveyed its domain. Dr. Angus Mackenzie, better known as Dr. Mack, muttered under his breath as he adjusted the last bolt on his latest invention, the mechanical teapot. The device, an intricate contraption of copper tubing and tiny clockwork gears, was meant to brew the perfect cup of tea at precisely the right temperature. His eyes, bright and electric with thought, darted across the blueprint pinned to the wall, where scribbled calculations and ink smudges suggested a sleepless night of tinkering. "All right, old girl," he murmured, patting the teapot's polished surface. "Let's see if you live up to your promise." He flicked a lever. The teapot whirred to life, steam hissing from its spout like an eager dragon. Inside, a tiny automated arm delicately measured out tea leaves, while a miniature gyroscope tilted just enough to pour boiling water at exactly 96 degrees Celsius. The aroma of Earl Grey and a hint of bergamot filled the workshop. Dr. Mack grinned until he noticed the whirring getting louder. The teapot shuddered violently, its polished surface rattling as steam pressure built up inside. He lunged for the emergency valve, but it was too late. Boom! The lid shot off like a cannonball, ricocheting off the workshop's ceiling and lodging itself into a rack of half-finished inventions. A mechanical squirrel chattered in protest, dodging falling gears. Dr. Mack, now dusted in tea leaves and scalding vapor, sighed. Note to self: reinforce pressure release mechanism. From the far side of the room, a voice called out, barely stifling laughter. "Another success, Dr. Mack?" Ellie Dawson, his self-appointed assistant and the town's unofficial problem solver, leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. She was 19, sharp-eyed, and one of the few people in town who believed in Dr. Mack's brilliance, even if his inventions had a habit of exploding, misfiring, or, on occasion, acquiring sentience. Dr. Mack, still dripping tea, scratched his head. "Success is a matter of perspective." Ellie stepped inside, sidestepping a pile of tangled wires. "Well, if your goal was to make the entire workshop smell like an old library's tea parlor, then congratulations." The mechanical owl hooted in agreement. Dr. Mack picked up the dented teapot, examining its inner workings. It was perfect, right up until the catastrophic failure, which in fairness is an improvement over immediate catastrophic failure. Ellie smirked. "I hate to interrupt your scientific triumph, but the mayor sent me. Apparently the town council is concerned about your latest invention." Dr. Mack brightened. "Oh, you mean the whimsy weathermaker?" Ellie hesitated. "They're calling it the device that made it snow inside the bakery." Dr. Mack waved a hand dismissively. "A minor calibration issue. You wouldn't believe how hard it is to get localized meteorological phenomena to respect indoor boundaries." Ellie folded her arms. "The mayor's giving you an ultimatum. Either prove your inventions work or shut down the workshop." Dr. Mack froze. The weight of those words settled over him like an iron wrench. Shut down his workshop? Impossible. This place, this messy, wonderful, alive place, was his world. Every bolt, every gear, every half-finished machine contained a piece of his relentless curiosity, his wild brilliance, his belief that technology should make life more magical. For a moment he was silent. Then he straightened his goggles, his usual manic energy returning with a snap. "Then we'll just have to put on a demonstration they won't forget." Ellie raised an eyebrow. "You have something in mind?" Dr. Mack grinned, the kind of grin that made small children and insurance companies nervous. "Oh, I have just the thing." From the shadows of the workshop, a brass and glass contraption stood waiting, an invention unlike anything the town had ever seen. The whimsy weathermaker gleamed in the morning light, its delicate gears poised to shape the very elements themselves. Dr. Mack tapped the machine affectionately. "Let's show them what true invention looks like." Chapter 2, The Weathermaker's Mishap. The Whimsy. Weathermaker stood in the center of the town square like an alien artifact from a future no one had imagined. It was a gleaming brass and glass contraption, a delicate fusion of gears, tubes, and tiny, spinning turbines perched atop a rotating copper pedestal. Thin, iridescent antennae extended skyward, twitching like insect feelers as they sensed the atmosphere. Dr. Mack, clad in a patched-up lab coat, his goggles askew, and his wild hair vibrating with excitement, stood before the gathered crowd. Ellie stood at his side, arms folded, already bracing for inevitable disaster. The townsfolk, a mix of curiosity and skepticism, whispered among themselves. The children watched with wide-eyed anticipation, while the adults, particularly Mayor Fitzwilliam, a ruddy-faced man with a perpetually furrowed brow, looked considerably less amused. Dr. Mack clapped his hands together. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed skeptics and small enthusiastic people, I present to you the Whimsy Weathermaker, a device that will revolutionize meteorology, agriculture, and most importantly, picnic planning. Ellie leaned in. Are you sure this is a good idea? Dr. Mack adjusted his goggles. Absolutely not. But science waits for no one. He reached for the lever, a beautifully crafted piece of polished brass with a lightning-shaped handle. With a dramatic flourish, he yanked it downward. The Whimsy Weathermaker hummed. A soft melodic chime rang through the square. The device's delicate gears spun faster, its antenna twitched, and the air itself seemed to hold its breath. Then boom! A burst of golden mist erupted from the device, swirling into the sky in a spectacular shimmering column. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the air thickened with static, a low electric hum tickling their skin. And then it began. Snow. Not just any snow. Blue snow. It fluttered down in slow, mesmerizing spirals, catching the sunlight and glowing like sapphire dust. The town square transformed into a scene from a storybook. The rooftops and cobblestones blanketed in an otherworldly frost. Children shrieked with delight, their mittens. Where did those come from? Reaching out to catch the glowing flakes, Dr. Mack beamed. Marvelous! A slight deviation in the crystalline structure, but otherwise, crack. A rumble rolled through the air, deep and ominous. Ellie grabbed his sleeve. Dr. Mack, why is it getting darker? Above them, the sky, once a brilliant autumn blue, was turning violet. The clouds swirled unnaturally, rolling inward like a closing fist. Lightning flickered inside the storm, not white or yellow, but an unnerving shade of green. A gust of wind ripped through the square, snatching hats and sending skirts billowing. The town's banner twisted in the air like a trapped bird, and the once delighted crowd suddenly wasn't so delighted anymore. Uh-oh, Dr. Mack muttered. Uh-oh, Ellie snapped. What do you mean, uh-oh? I mean, perhaps a calibration issue. Mayor Fitzwilliam, his face now the color of a boiled beet, stormed forward, shaking a fur-lined glove. Where did he get that? The weather was clearly messing with reality itself. Mackenzie, what is this madness? He bellowed. Dr. Mack held up a finger. Now, before we panic... A hailstone the size of a grapefruit slammed into a fruit cart, splattering apples and pears across the cobblestones. Panic commenced. Shouts and screams filled the square as tiny cyclones of snow twisted unpredictably, pulling hats from heads and sending chickens tumbling through the air. The town's stray cat, Bertram the Fearless, leapt onto a barrel, stared at the storming sky, and immediately changed his mind, disappearing into an alley. Dr. Mack frantically twisted dials on the Weathermaker. All right, no need for alarm, he called out, dodging a runaway umbrella. We just need to... Boom! A lightning bolt zapped the mayor's hat, reducing it to smoking felt. Ellie grabbed Dr. Mack's shoulders. Turn it off! Dr. Mack nodded rapidly, wrenching the lightning-shaped lever back upward. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the clouds trembled, shuddering as if sighing in defeat. The unnatural storm dissipated, the violet sky fading back to blue and the air settled. A single golden snowflake drifted lazily down. It landed on Mayor Fitzwilliam's nose. Silence. The crowd turned slowly toward Dr. Mack, their expressions a mix of awe and barely contained fury. Dr. Mack cleared his throat. Well, that was informative. Mayor Fitzwilliam's gloves squeaked as he clenched his fists. Dr. Mackenzie, he growled, you are banned from testing any more contraptions in the town square. Dr. Mack tilted his head. What about in the park? Anywhere, Dr. Mack sighed. How about just a little bit of— Mackenzie! Ellie grabbed his arm before he could negotiate himself into permanent exile. Got it, Mayor. No more experiments. She yanked Dr. Mack toward the alleyway. As they walked away, Dr. Mack sighed wistfully. You have to admit, Ellie, for a moment there, it was glorious. Ellie smirked. Yeah, right up until the sky turned purple. Dr. Mack grinned. Noted. Shall we fine-tune the Weathermaker? Ellie groaned. Dr. Mack, we are already on thin ice. Dr. Mack's eyes twinkled. Yes, but imagine what we could do with actual ice. Ellie facepalmed. Behind them, the town square steamed softly, as if the weather itself was catching its breath. The town had survived another Mackenzie Marvel, just barely, and there was always another one coming. Chapter 3. A visitor from afar, the arrival of a new mind, and the clash of invention styles. The rain came down in silver sheets, hammering against the tin roof of Dr. Mack's workshop, drumming out a rhythm that matched the whirring and clanking within. Inside, the air hummed with life, gears clicking, steam hissing, wires crackling as Dr. Mack worked feverishly on the whimsy Weathermaker's latest iteration. His goggles fogged up as he hunched over the machine, muttering equations under his breath, twisting knobs and tightening bolts with reckless precision. Brass tubing wound around a glowing orb at the center of the contraption, pulsing with an eerie blue light. All right, my fickle friend, he murmured to the device. No more spontaneous hailstorms this time. We'll keep the snow localized, perhaps a gentle autumn breeze just to show them— Knock, knock. Dr. Mack didn't look up. He rarely got visitors, and when he did, they usually barged in demanding explanations for why their laundry had turned weightless, or why the town fountain was now producing lemonade instead of water. Knock, knock, knock. A sharper, more deliberate rapping. With a sigh, he pulled off his goggles and opened the door. Standing on the workshop's creaky front step was a young woman, no older than 19, wrapped in a soaked navy blue coat, her dark curls dripping from the downpour. In one hand, she clutched a notebook covered in scribbled equations, and in the other, a toolkit that looked heavier than she did. She tilted her chin up. You're Dr. Angus Mackenzie, right? Dr. Mack squinted. That depends. If you're here to complain about the lightning incident at the mayor's meeting, I maintain that was purely coincidental atmospheric conditions. The young woman narrowed her eyes. I'm not here to complain, I'm here to learn. Dr. Mack blinked. Learn what exactly? The girl straightened her posture. Everything. The workshop test. The inside of Dr. Mack's workshop was a cathedral of chaos, a labyrinth of half-finished machines, floating gears, and scraps of blueprints pinned to every available surface. Steam curled from vents, and the air smelled of copper, oil, and burnt toast, courtesy of a malfunctioning automatic breakfast machine. Ellie took it all in with a sharp, assessing gaze. Dr. Mack watched as she carefully stepped over a runaway cog, avoiding the traps of tripwires and loose wiring like she'd seen this kind of madness before. Most people, he said, take one look at this place and run the other way. Ellie shrugged. I've seen worse. Dr. Mack perked up. Oh? You've apprenticed under a mad scientist before? Ellie shot him a look. No, but my uncle was an engineer, and I helped him build solar turbines from scrap. I know the difference between genius and recklessness. Dr. Mack gasped in mock offense. And which am I? Ellie smirked. The jury's still out. Dr. Mack let out a delighted laugh. I like you, Ellie. But tell me, why are you here? You don't seem the type to worship at the altar of untested science. Ellie took a deep breath. Because you're the best. And because I want to prove there's a better way. Dr. Mack's amusement flickered. A better way? Ellie gestured at the Weathermaker, still sparking slightly from its last test. You invent incredible things, but you don't test them. You don't refine them before throwing them into the world. If you just slowed down, focused on the science instead of the spectacle, you could change everything. Dr. Mack tilted his head. But where's the fun in that? Ellie sighed. It's not about fun, it's about making sure your inventions actually work before they accidentally create tornadoes in the mayor's office. Dr. Mack grinned. That was a small tornado. and the mayor was only mildly inconvenienced. Ellie crossed her arms.
I think I can help you, but you have to let me. A challenge accepted. Dr. Mack paced in front of the whimsy weathermaker, stroking his chin. All right, Ellie the pragmatic, let's see what you're made of. He gestured toward a small humming device on his workbench.
This is the miniaturized fog generator. A simple enough concept. Creates a controlled mist, perfect for cooling crops in a heat wave or dramatically revealing secret entrances in castles. Ellie picked up the small brass device, inspecting its wiring.
And what's wrong with it? Dr. Mack wiggled his fingers dramatically. That's for you to find out.
Ellie set her notebook down, pulling a screwdriver from her toolkit. With quick precision, she unscrewed the casing, revealing a delicate array of circuitry and fluid chambers. Within moments, she spotted it.
Your pressure valves are misaligned, she said, adjusting a tiny screw.
That's why it keeps jamming. She tightened the bolt, reset the wiring, and handed it back. Try it now. Dr. Mack raised an eyebrow and pressed the activation switch.
The miniaturized fog generator hummed softly, then released a gentle, silvery mist, swirling elegantly through the air without a single misfire.
Dr. Mack gawked.
Well, I'll be damned,
Ellie smirked.
A little patience goes a long way, Dr. Mack.
Dr. Mack clutched his chest.
Careful, my dear, you're making too much sense. If we're not careful, we might create something stable. Ellie laughed, shaking her head. So, do I get the job? Dr. Mack grinned, extending a hand.
Ellie Dawson, welcome to Mackenzie's House of Questionable Science. He shook his hand firmly.
Let's make real marvels, Dr. Mack.
Outside, the storm had passed. But inside the workshop, a new force of nature had arrived. And she wasn't going anywhere.